Oh, I remember well that day when it all began. It was a trip to the beach house, the kind we look forward to all year long. The place was magical. Palm trees swaying in the wind, the salty smell of the sea filling the air, and the sound of the waves crashing like peaceful music. I thought it would be just another retreat to rest, but I could hardly have imagined that such a beautiful and peaceful setting would become the stage for something so intense, something that felt so right and wrong at the same time. If you're curious to know where this story will lead, subscribe to the channel now and come with me to the next chapters. My father-in-law, Henrique, was the kind of person you could never ignore. He had such a strong presence that when he opened his mouth, everyone stopped to listen. At 47 years old, with gray hair that seemed to tell stories of wisdom and a body that showed he took care of himself, he was the example of a mature and confident man. I, Camilla, a 23-year-old college student, always had a provocative personality, but I knew how to measure my actions. It was as if I had an internal button that knew exactly how far I could go. On that trip, it seemed like the universe had conspired to create the perfect scenario. The idea was to relax, but at the same time, there was something in the air, something that made my heart beat a little faster. I wondered how far curiosity and provocations could take me. Henrique always treated me with great respect, but every now and then our eyes met in a different way. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe not. All I knew was that there seemed to be something special about that trip, something that I still didn't quite understand. We arrived at the beach house on an afternoon so sunny that the sky looked like it was hand-painted. The house was incredible, spacious, with huge windows that let the sun flood into every corner. The smell of the sea mixed with the fresh air came in through the door, filling the room with a light but mysterious energy. As soon as I stepped inside, I had the feeling that something different was about to happen, even without knowing what. Henrique was the last to enter, carrying some suitcases. He was wearing a thin shirt that exposed part of his chest, and for a moment, my eyes lingered there without me noticing. When I realized it, I looked away so quickly that it might have even seemed like an awkward dance. He noticed. He always noticed. And with that calm and confident smile, he said, "It seems like you're really excited about the trip, huh, Camilla?" His tone of voice was casual, but there was something in the way he said things that made everything sound like it had a deeper meaning. I tried to hide my nervousness with a light laugh. And who wouldn't be? "This place is so beautiful," I replied, trying to appear completely calm as I picked up my backpack and headed to the room where I would be staying. My heart was beating fast, and I didn't even know why. It was as if that place, that trip, that moment, everything was pulling me towards something that I still couldn't explain. In the first few days, everything seemed to follow a calm routine. We spent the mornings on the beach, shared lively conversations around the table during meals, and in the late afternoon, we took a few walks around the garden, enjoying the sunset. Everything was simple. Everything was calm. But it was in one of these moments that things began to change. That afternoon, I was sitting on a lounge chair near the pool. The sun was still shining in the sky, but the heat was already starting to dissipate. With a book in my hands, I immersed myself in reading, trying to ignore the world around me. Suddenly, Henrique appeared. He approached without hurrying, carrying a glass with some drink. He sat down in the chair next to me, and even without looking directly at him, I felt his presence so close that my heart seemed to accelerate. "You seem very focused," he commented, with that relaxed tone that usually made me relax. But this time, there was something different, something that seemed to vibrate in the air. "It's a good book," I replied, without looking up from the pages, but aware of his every movement. The silence that followed was not one of those uncomfortable ones. On the contrary, he seemed full of something that I could not explain. Henrique leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. For a moment, he just stared at the pool. The sound of the waves. It's so relaxing, don't you think? He said, almost as if talking to himself. Yeah, it really is, I murmured, trying not to seem too involved, even though inside my attention was completely focused on him. He paused, as if carefully choosing the words he would say next. We should do this more often. These family trips, they're good for everyone. I nodded in agreement, but I couldn't help but notice that there was something different about the way he spoke. It wasn't just about traveling. Something in that sentence, in the way he looked at the horizon, seemed to carry a weight or, who knows, a deeper meaning. When our eyes met, it was as if the world had gone silent for a moment. My heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something new, intriguing. He looked away first, raising the glass to his mouth and taking a calm sip before leaning back in his chair. Enjoy these days, Camilla. You deserve it, he said, with an almost imperceptible smile, before standing up and walking calmly into the house. I stood there, alone, but not completely. My heart was beating so fast that it seemed impossible to ignore. I didn't know exactly what I was feeling, but it was as if something inside me had awakened. The heat rising through my body wasn't because of the sun. As the sound of the waves filled the silence around me, I realized that this trip was not just a family outing. Something more was happening, and I knew deep down that this was just the beginning of something that could change everything. In the days that followed, something seemed to hover in the air between Henrique and me. It was like a low, quiet flame, but ready to grow with the slightest breath. The teasing began to arise so naturally that it seemed to be part of our routine. During breakfast, while everyone was chatting animatedly, our eyes would meet. Each time this happened, my heart would race, and I could feel that he noticed it too. It was an intensity that neither of us would admit in words, but that became impossible to ignore. On a hot afternoon, after lunch, I decided to go to the beach alone. The sun was shining brightly, and the sea breeze brought that salty, fresh smell that I loved. I put on my favorite red bikini, the one that seemed made to highlight my tanned skin tone. The vibrant pattern contrasted with the light sand, and as I walked towards the sea, I felt Henrique's eyes following me, even without having to look back to confirm. I entered the water, letting the waves engulf me. The freshness was invigorating, and for a few minutes I allowed myself to forget everything and just feel the movement of the sea. When I finally returned to the sand, wiping the salty water from my face, I noticed Henrique. There he was, sitting on a chair with a straw hat, his eyes fixed on me. He didn't try to hide it, and watched me with a half smile, the kind of smile that seemed to contain secrets. Good water? He asked, his voice calm, but filled with something that seemed deeper. I grabbed the towel to dry myself and answered, trying to sound carefree. Perfect. Even so, I couldn't help but shiver when I noticed the way he looked at me. It was as if every move I made was something worthy of his attention. Then he said something that made my heart skip a beat. You know you attract attention, don't you? I pretended not to understand, forcing a light tone. I think it's the color of the bikini. It's kind of flashy. Covering my shoulders with the towel, I tried to hide the heat rising in my face, but he just laughed, that low, confident laugh, shaking his head slightly. It's not the bikini, Camila. My cheeks immediately heated up, and I hated myself a little for not being able to hide it. Still, I kept my composure and replied, You say such things, Henrique. I smiled slightly, trying to appear calm, and picked up my hat. I walked to the lounger next to him and sat down. The sound of the waves and the heat of the sun seemed more intense at that moment, but nothing compared to the energy that pulsed between us. It was something I couldn't deny, even if I tried. The silence between us seemed to take on a life of its own, filling the space like an invisible presence. Each breath carried a weight, as if there were words wanting to escape, but neither of us had the courage to say. It wasn't uncomfortable, but intense, almost like a silent conversation between our souls. Enrique looked away, fixing his eyes on the horizon, where the sea stretched endlessly. The gentle breeze gently ruffled the strands of the straw hat he was holding, and in a low, almost thoughtful voice, he commented, "This place makes us forget the world outside, don't you think?" It was a simple sentence, but said with a depth that seemed to hide something more. I knew he was talking about the sea, the calm that scenery brought, but at that moment my mind was far from anything else, far. I wasn't thinking about the world outside, about the worries or responsibilities that awaited me. All that occupied my thoughts was that moment, his proximity, the sound of his voice, the way he seemed to make time slow down. It was as if, for a brief moment, the universe had reduced everything to the essential. The two of us there, in that silence that said more than any words. Comment below if you think something more could happen with my father-in-law. And if you want to hear more stories like this, click on the video on the screen.